I'm getting choked up. Sorry.
What if I told you that one of Hollywood's strongest men once stood at his father's funeral and couldn't cry? Not because he was too tough, but because they'd never really connected. Denzel Washington has faced down corrupt cops, trained assassins, and some of cinema's darkest villains. But his biggest battles? Those happened off-screen, in the quiet moments nobody saw today. We're pulling back the curtain on the losses that shaped a legend. Denzel Washington.
This is terrible. Didn't cry at a funeral.
Wasn't always the unshakable icon we know today. Here's where it really starts. December 28th, 1954, Mount Vernon, New York, a small working-class town where faith collided with struggle every single day. His mother, Lennis, ran a modest beauty salon, her hands rough from endless work, her voice steady through exhaustion. His father was Reverend Denzel Hayes Washington Sr., a Pentecostal minister, stoic and strict. There were prayers before dinner and sermons on Sundays. But hugs, those were rare. Denzel once said his mother was city, his father was country. Opposites attract, he explained. And then they separate. And that's exactly what happened. By the time he turned 14, the home that once echoed with gospel hymns had gone completely silent. His parents divorced in 1968, and something inside young Denzel broke quietly. They were like night and day, he remembered. His father, the man of God, slowly vanished from his life. Years later, Denzel would admit something that cuts deep. I didn't cry when he died, not because I didn't love him, but because we never really connected. It gets worse. Without his father's steady presence, Denzel started drifting toward the wrong crowd. Mount Vernon street corners were full of boys chasing danger, mistaking trouble for courage. The guys I hung with did 40 years combined, he once said softly. They went one way, I went another. He still wonders why he was spared, why God chose him to walk free while his friends disappeared into prison. But listen to this. His mother saw the shadow creeping over her son's future, and she was terrified. So, she made a decision that felt like betrayal, but was really salvation. She sent 14-year-old Denzel away to Oakland Military Academy in New Windsor, New York. For a teenage boy, it felt like exile. The sound of boots on pavement, the chill of early mornings, the sting of shouted orders. It all felt like punishment. He didn't understand that love was wearing a soldier's uniform. This next part, straight up wild. Years later, Denzel would say, I think my mother saved my life. It was the best thing that could have happened to me. In that world of drills and discipline, he learned something the streets could never teach. Endurance, humility, and the power of silence. Discipline became my first language, he explained. The one my mother taught me without words. And that's when the tables turned. When he returned home, the noise of the streets no longer called his name. The lost boy had found direction. But that's not all. The silence of his childhood never left him. It lingered in every role he played, every pause, every glance. That boy from Mount Vernon carried those lessons into manhood. Lessons forged in heartbreak and discipline, long before Hollywood's lights ever found him. Now here's where it gets insane. When Denzel left Mount Vernon in the early 1970s to attend Fordham University, survival became his daily reality. The winters bit through his thin coat. His pockets stayed as empty as his stomach. Some nights he counted the hours until morning just to forget he was hungry. He slept in narrow dorm beds that creaked with every turn. Sometimes he'd sit in the cafeteria with a cup of coffee he couldn't afford to refill, pretending the smell of other people's meals was enough. I didn't know what I wanted, he admitted later. I was just trying to survive. His mother's salon could barely keep its own lights on, so Denzel worked every job he could find, sweeping hallways as a janitor, delivering papers, running trays in the cafeteria, carrying boxes. His hands smelled of soap and grease. His shoes were always wet. On winter nights, he'd walk home alone, whispering to himself lines from plays he'd never performed. The city didn't see me, he said. Not yet. Here's where the mask falls off. In summer 1975, the smallest miracle changed everything. He took a job at a YMCA camp in Lakeville, New York, teaching kids to swim for a few dollars a day. One night at a talent show, someone asked him to fill in for a missing performer. He didn't want to, but he did it anyway. The kids laughed. The counselors cheered. A woman in the crowd leaned forward and said, "You were born to act." That's when everything unraveled. Something cracked open inside him. It wasn't applause he heard. It was destiny. He returned to Fordham a changed man, switched his major to drama, and graduated in 1977, thinner than ever, but burning with purpose. A scholarship led him to the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, but the dream came with a brutal price. Some nights he ate nothing but a slice of bread and tap water. He wrapped himself in an old coat, rehearsing lines by the flicker of a dying bulb. "The Pacific wind bit through my jacket," he recalled, "but the stage lights kept me warm. It turns darker from here." After a year, he returned to New York with nothing but a suitcase and a worn Bible. He auditioned anywhere, for anything. Most days, the answer was, "We'll call you." They never did. Some nights he slept on friends' couches, other nights on floors. He wasn't homeless, not quite, but he knew the weight of not belonging anywhere. "Each no felt like a door slamming on my future," he said. But faith kept me knocking. And then came the bombshell. Small roles started trickling in. Wilma in 1977, a TV movie where he barely made rent. Then St. Elsewhere in 1982, his breakthrough. But every triumph carried the memory of what came before. The hunger, the cold, the endless waiting. He didn't rise fast. He rose steady. Every sleepless night, every empty stomach became a prayer he refused to abandon. For Denzel Washington, greatness wasn't a gift. It was a debt he paid in hunger, faith, and fire. Brace yourself for this one. As his career exploded, so did the pressure Cry Freedom brought his first Oscar nomination. Glory earned him gold and defined his art. Malcolm X, Philadelphia, The Hurricane. Each film became a wound stitched into greatness. By the time Training Day arrived, the world had crowned him unstoppable. But behind the triumph was bone-deep exhaustion. 16-hour days, scripts heavy as conscience, nights spent whispering lines until they trembled with truth. Every victory costs something, he would say. You pay for it in time, in sleep, in peace. But this next twist? Game-changing. In 1986, before the world truly knew his name, Denzel was offered a lucrative, prestigious role, and he walked away. The script twisted race into spectacle, turning pain into profit. That night, he sought counsel from Sidney Poitier, the man who'd walked this road before Poitier's voice was calm. The first few films you choose will define who you are. Denzel closed the script and left the room. That was the best decision I ever made. He'd say years later, "Here's where the truth hits hard." As his legend grew, so did his compassion. When September 11th shattered New York, he returned not as a celebrity, but as a son. Amid the dust and broken steel, he stood where faith had been tested. "It changed me," he whispered. From that silence he returned grew understanding. From understanding, legacy, and it gets even messier. He became a mentor, quietly funding young actors' educations. One of them was Chadwick Boseman on set. Chadwick once called him Sir. Denzel smiled and said, "Just call me brother." Years later, after Chadwick's passing, that single word echoed in his heart like scripture. He gave everything, Denzel said, softly. He was grace. The real chaos starts here. While the world admired Denzel's talent and integrity, they admired something even rarer, a love that endured. In 1977, he met Pauletta Pearson on the set of Wilma. She was a classically trained pianist whose poise felt like calm in human form. He tried to be charming and failed. She smiled, seeing through his nerves. On their first date, she reached for the check before he could. "She paid," Denzel laughed. And that's how I knew she was the one. They married June 25th, 1983. No red carpet, no headlines, just two dreamers holding hands in a small chapel. Their first apartment was tiny, the wallpaper peeling, the rent always late, but they had love and a second-hand piano in the corner. Pauletta would play hymns at night while Denzel studied scripts by the window. But things were about to explode. As the roles got bigger, the absences got longer. The work was relentless, he recalled. 16-hour days, weeks turning into months. Pauletta became the steady heart of the home. Mother, teacher, nurse, protector, all at once. "My wife did the heavy lifting," he admitted. "I worked, but she raised the kids." There were nights when he called too late, the children already asleep, her voice soft but tired. "We're fine," she'd say. "Just hurry home." I missed a lot of moments, he confessed, but she never made me feel like I had to earn her love again, and that's when the tables turned. In 1995, after 12 years of marriage, they renewed their vows in South Africa. That day, he realized true love doesn't demand perfection, only presence. This part left everyone stunned. One night, after weeks away filming, he opened the front door at 2:13 a.m. to find one light still burning. Pauletta was sitting by the window, half reading, half waiting. He whispered, "I'm home." She didn't scold him. She just smiled and said, "Then come sit." That's when everything changed. Under the weight of silence and forgiveness, he understood. Presence is greater than success. "She saved me," he said, not with words, but with patience. Over time, he came home earlier, listened longer, prayed more. We pray more than we argue. He laughed gently. That's the glue. Here's where it really explodes. In those quiet prayers, they rebuilt what distance had tried to break. Now 4 decades later, their love doesn't shout. It hums low and steady like jazz beneath the noise. But listen to this. If marriage was his vow to never repeat his parents' mistakes, then fatherhood became his quiet promise to build the home he never had. And then came the moment that changed everything. In 1991, while filming Malcolm X, someone pulled him aside. His father, Reverend Denzel Washington Sr., had passed away. No warning, no final moment, no goodbye. The world saw a powerful actor stepping into one of the greatest performances of his life. Behind the camera, he was a son who didn't know how to grieve. "We never played ball," Denzel said. "He worked all the time and preached on weekends. That was life." Here's where the mask falls off. "I didn't cry at his funeral," he admitted. "Not because I didn't love him, but because we never truly connected." It gets worse. For weeks after, he went through the motions. Work, lights, lines. But something in him had shifted. Playing Malcolm X, shouting on screen about fathers and faith and freedom. The words weren't just dialogue anymore. They were pieces of his own unfinished story. Alone in his trailer, he'd look at himself in the mirror and whisper, "I wish we'd talked more." But this next part? Game. Changing. Years later, he began to understand his father's silent kind of love. The man who never said, "I love you," had still built the foundation beneath his life. Denzel told students, "Your parents won't always show love the way you expect, but one day you'll see it was there all along." That realization became his redemption, grief that taught him gratitude. Now here's where it gets insane. He'd promised himself to love loudly, to be present, to protect the people who brought light into his life. On the set of The Preacher's Wife in 1996, that vow took shape in a friendship that felt touched by destiny. Whitney Houston, the voice that could lift heaven itself, and Denzel created something beyond cinema, something sacred. Between takes, she'd hum old gospel hymns, her voice rising through the church rafters. He'd grin and tease, "You don't even need a choir, Whitney. You are the choir." She'd laugh and shoot back, "And you're the preacher keeping us all honest." They weren't lovers, not family by blood, but by belief, by shared faith. And then, total chaos. A cold February morning in 2012, the call came. Whitney was gone at 48. Too young for goodbye, too bright for silence. Just months earlier, she'd filmed Sparkle, her comeback story about redemption. It was meant to be her return. Instead, it became her farewell. Everyone wanted her voice, Denzel said, but few ever listened to her heart. At her funeral, he sat in the back pew, head bowed, hands clasped tight. No speech, no spotlight, just silence. "She gave everything," he whispered, "and it cost her everything." This is where it all falls apart. For weeks afterward, her absence played like a melody he couldn't stop hearing. "I wish I'd called her more," he confessed. "I thought there'd be time. Brace yourself for this one." Years later, a familiar pain returned. He'd promised himself never to let love go unspoken again, and that promise took on new meaning when Chadwick Boseman spoke his name with reverence. The rising star had once been a struggling student who couldn't afford a summer program at Oxford. He never knew that Denzel Washington had quietly paid the bill. No announcement, no headlines,
I understand from Chadwick Boseman himself that you in some way are actually responsible for him being Black Panther.
Am I?
Yeah.
Oh, you, because I paid for him to go to school?
How did that come about?
I didn't know him. Felicia Richard was helping kids, and she called different people, and she called me, and I said, yeah, I'll sponsor wherever. And she said, well, you're sponsoring, or he called to thank. That's how I found out it was him. You're sponsoring this kid, some Chadwick Boseman guy. And I said, yeah, okay, Chad, I want my money back.
Just a signature under a dim lamp at midnight. When Chadwick found success and learned the truth, he approached Denzel with tears in his eyes. "You never knew me," he said, his voice trembling, "but you made it possible for me to be here." Denzel smiled, deeply moved. "That's what we're supposed to do. Pass it on. Here's where the truth hits hard." On the night of the American Film Institute tribute, Chadwick stood on stage and declared, "There is no Black Panther without Denzel Washington." The audience rose, clapping. Denzel just lowered his head, his smile humble. Two eras of greatness bowing to each other, the torch and the flame. But things were about to explode. Even as the world celebrated Chadwick as a king, he was fighting a war no one could see, a battle with cancer he carried alone. He endured surgeries, treatments, exhaustion, yet his performances burned brighter with every role. He told no one. He showed up. Denzel said later, every day he showed up.
What about Black Panther 2? Anything?
Only heaven saw the cost. And then came the bombshell. August 2020. The news broke. Chadwick Boseman, gone at 43, Denzel sat frozen, the phone slipping from his hand. He hadn't known about the agony, the sleepless nights, the quiet bravery. He gave everything, Denzel said. He was grace. This is where it all falls apart. He carried it all in secret, and I never knew. That sentence echoed inside him for months. How could I not have seen? At the private memorial, a gospel choir sang, "Take my hand, precious Lord." The same song from Whitney's funeral. He closed his eyes, and the words felt like prayer and punishment. "That's the thing about angels," he murmured. "They never tell you they're leaving." Here's where it really explodes. Perhaps no words can capture the ache of losing the one who not only gave you life, but saved it. For Denzel, losing his mother Lennis wasn't just goodbye. It was the quiet closing of the chapter that made him who he was. He still remembered that day at 14, watching her fold his clothes into a suitcase. "You're sending me away?" he'd asked. "I'm sending you forward," she said simply. Even when fame came, he called her every Sunday. "She was the strongest woman I ever knew," he said. When he bought her a house, she told him, "Nice, but don't forget who built the foundation." And then came the moment that changed everything. One day, the calls stopped. The laughter faded. He poured 2 cups of coffee out of habit, but the second stayed untouched. "She went home," he said softly. Here's where the mask falls off. Through decades of giving, he's donated millions, often quietly, often anonymously. A steadfast supporter of the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, he's funded mentorship programs nationwide. He contributed over $1 million to Wiley College, gave generously to Fordham, supported the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund and Fisher House Foundation. "If you're going to give quietly," he said. "The good will speak for itself." At home, his truest wealth sits around the dinner table. Pauletta remains his anchor after 40 years. Their 4 children have forged paths in film and storytelling. Family dinners are sacred. Laughter, prayer, stories stretching late into the night. Sometimes grandchildren run barefoot across the lawn, where once Denzel rehearsed lines under moonlight. "This," he says, "is the legacy." But listen to this final truth. Even now he continues working, not for fame, but fulfillment. Recently returning in The Equalizer 3, he reminds the world that power isn't in youth, but mastery offset. He mentors rising actors. Ease, he tells them, is a greater threat to progress than hardship. When the day ends, he steps outside, looking over the city that once defined him. The lights shimmer below, the sky stretches above, endless and forgiving. He breathes deeply, slow, grateful, alive. The man who once carried the weight of the world now carries only peace. So here's my question for you. What's the biggest lesson from Denzel's story that speaks to you? The discipline his mother taught him? The love that endured 4 decades? Or maybe the way he turned every loss into something greater? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if Denzel's journey moved you, if his strength and grace inspired you, hit that subscribe button. Because stories like this, Stories of real people overcoming real pain. Those are the ones worth telling. See you in the next one.